You are 13 years old. Right now, you're worrying about a math test or a crush you're too embarrassed to mention. You are, by every modern definition, a child. Travel back 10,000 years. Same age, same body, same brain. Except in that world, at 13, you might already be married, raising a child of your own while still being one yourself. And nobody around you would have blinked. This is the story of why ancient humans had children this young, and it's not the story you think. It wasn't ignorance. It was survival, running its calculations in the background of an entire species. Understanding why changes how you see childhood, parenthood, and the brutal math that kept us alive. Let's demolish the biggest myth first. You've probably heard life expectancy in ancient times was around 30. So obviously, people had to rush into having kids. They were already halfway to the grave by their teens. This is one of the most misleading statistics in popular history. Life expectancy at birth was low, yes, often in the 20s or 30s. But that number is dragged down almost entirely by catastrophic child mortality. In many pre-modern populations, a third to half of all children died before age 5. But here's what almost nobody tells you. If you survived childhood, if you made it to 15, your remaining life expectancy jumped dramatically. Plenty of ancient people lived into their 50s, 60s, even 70s. Grandparents existed. They were valued. Think about what that means if you made it to 15. You had a real shot at living to 60. That's not a species racing the clock. That's a species with a much stranger reason for what it did. So, everyone died at 30, so you had to breed fast, doesn't actually hold up. So, what was actually going on? Puberty itself hasn't always arrived on the same schedule. Right now, in wealthy nations, the average age of first menstruation sits around 12 to 13. That number has been dropping over the past century, not rising. In the mid-1800s, in parts of Europe, the average was closer to 15 or 16. Why the difference? Nutrition. Imagine your body is like a bank account. Pregnancy costs tens of thousands of calories. Your body won't approve that withdrawal until it sees a stable balance, enough fat stores, enough steady food, enough safety margin. This is called critical fat mass, which means, in societies with chronic food insecurity, puberty for many girls didn't arrive at 12 or 13. It arrived later, sometimes at 15, 16, even later during famine. So the picture of ancient 13-year-olds universally starting families gets complicated fast. But here's where it flips again, because it's not that simple either. Look at ancient Rome. Roman law set the minimum legal age for marriage at 12 for girls, 14 for boys. That means at 13, you were already past the legal threshold, not approaching it. Now, legal age and typical age of first childbirth weren't the same thing. Many Roman brides, especially among elites, were often married in their late teens instead. But the fact that 12 was even considered legally valid tells you something. Childhood in that world worked completely differently. There was no adolescence, no decade-long buffer zone, no still figuring things out phase. You were either a small child who needed constant care, or an adult in training expected to take on adult roles the moment your body signaled readiness. How did an entire species normalize what we now consider unthinkable? Because the social machinery around you was built to move you toward adulthood fast, once your body gave the signal. Now the real engine behind all of this, mortality math. Imagine living in a small foraging band or early village, somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 years ago. Your population is under constant threat: disease, famine, predators, violence, and childbirth itself was one of the leading causes of death for women throughout almost all of human history. In that world, every woman capable of bearing children was a precious, limited resource for the whole group. Anthropologists call this high extrinsic mortality death driven by outside forces, not aging. When extrinsic mortality is high, evolutionary theory predicts something specific. Organisms shift toward earlier reproduction. Biologists call this life history theory the trade-offs every organism makes between growth, survival, and reproduction, shaped by how dangerous the environment is. In a safe environment, waiting to reproduce pays off. You'll likely survive long enough to do it later, and your offspring benefit from a more mature parent. In a dangerous one, waiting is a gamble that often doesn't pay off, because you might not get a later. This isn't abstract. It's visible in the record. In one Neolithic site in Turkey, archaeologists found the skeleton of a girl in her mid-teens, with pelvic damage consistent with multiple childbirths. The evidence suggests she died young, likely from complications related to childbirth. This is the part worth sitting with honestly. Early childbirth in bodies that weren't fully developed carried real, serious risk. Higher rates of obstructed labor, higher maternal death, higher infant death. This wasn't some peaceful, natural arrangement that worked out fine because it was natural. It was often brutal, and it cost lives. It happened anyway across cultures, across thousands of years, because a community's survival depended on replacing the people lost to disease and violence. That pressure could override even very real, very serious risk. Here's what makes this even more complicated. Human females are unusual among mammals. They experience menopause and then live for decades afterward, often outliving their reproductive years by 30 or 40 more years. Almost no other species does this. So why do human grandmothers stick around? The grandmother hypothesis proposes that older women who could no longer bear children became enormously valuable, helping raise their grandchildren instead, freeing up younger mothers to have children sooner, with real support in place. This matters here. A 13-year-old new mother in an ancient community wasn't necessarily doing this alone. She may have had a web of older female relatives, grandmothers, aunts, experienced women sharing the work. Anthropologists call this allo-parenting care from people other than the biological parents. Think about how different this is from today. A modern teenage mother often has almost no support beyond maybe one partner or parent. Ancient teenagers, in many cases, had an entire network. That support system didn't make early motherhood safe, but it likely made it more survivable than it would be for an isolated teenager today with no network at all. One more thing worth being honest about. This wasn't the same everywhere. Among hunter-gatherer groups studied today, like the Hadza in Tanzania, first births averaged 18 or 19 later than you'd expect. Nutritional stress and heavy physical activity delayed fertility, exactly as the critical fat mass idea predicts. Meanwhile, in early farming societies with more stable food but new pressures around land, inheritance, and alliances, marriage ages could trend younger, especially for elites. So the honest answer to why did ancient humans have kids this young is, it depends enormously on which humans, in which environment, under which system. It was never universal. Here's the thread underneath all of it. The modern idea of a long, protected adolescence years where you're biologically capable of adult life, but socially treated as still growing up, is an extraordinarily recent invention. For most of human history, the gap between capable and expected to was almost non-existent. A society without antibiotics, without modern medical care, without food security, couldn't afford the kind of delay we take for granted today. Every one of us is descended from people who survived and reproduced under exactly these brutal conditions. That's not a comfortable thought, but it's a true one, and it's part of why we exist at all. As nutrition improved, as child mortality dropped with vaccines and modern medicine, the age of marriage and first childbirth climbed steadily across most of the world. The extended, protected childhood we consider normal now, years of school, growing up slowly, being allowed to just be a kid, is a byproduct of safety our ancestors never had. The fact that today's 13-year-olds are worrying about math tests instead of childbirth isn't just a cultural shift. It's one of the quiet triumphs of human civilization, and it's worth protecting. If this changed how you see childhood or human history, hit like. It helps more people find this. Subscribe if you want more stories about the brutal, hidden math that kept our species alive. So the next time someone says ancient people had kids this young because they didn't know any better, you'll know the real answer. It wasn't ignorance. It was survival, running its calculations generation after generation until we finally found a way to give childhood back the time it always deserved.